here in Jacksonville is not getting any better right now, and we will just be here ready to move back as the water rises, Harris.
Wow. You know, Peter, as we look, we want to remind everybody that this is more than 400 miles from where Irma first came ashore in the Keys, where you are right now. That is so significant to talk about the size of the storm. I want to hand it off to Brian Kilmeade right now because I think you have a question.
Yeah, for one thing, I can't help but notice, Peter, but it doesn't seem bad out. I mean, it seems like the sun is coming out. So this is all about the winds that are causing the turmoil?
It's wind, and the tide, Brian, still isn't going to be high at its highest point until about 2 o'clock. So 2 hours from right now. But you're right, the rain here has stopped, and we actually drove across most of the entire panhandle for the last few hours to get here from Dothan, Alabama. And the rain was never horrible the whole way, but the wind was really picking up as we got closer and closer on I-10 East to get here. And once you get into Jacksonville, the police have many off-ramps and exit ramps off of the freeway and near 95, which anybody that's ever passed through Florida north or south is very familiar with. They've got them blocked off because there's already high water. Now, it's not the kind of high water that we saw in Houston last week when we were there for Harvey. But again, it is a strong current that's still coming.
Wow.
Right. Thanks, Peter.
All that water that was taken out. We anticipated the downtown area of Jacksonville to look like, and we know that the sheriff's department, the mayor, everybody had been telling everybody to shelter in place, and you're giving us some great reasons for that to happen there. We'll come back as the news warrants. Peter Ducey in downtown Jacksonville, Florida. Now let's go to where the storm first hit the United States, and that's the Keys. Adam Housley in Key Largo. It looks better in terms of the weather, but that damage is punishing.
Yeah, the weather finally, the winds finally stopped early this morning. We still got battered, even after the storm hit mainland a second time. It was well north of us. We still had pretty brutal winds here until early this morning, and the rain was still coming down. But as you can see behind me, the Keys got absolutely hammered, especially on the ocean side. Local officials here are saying it's a humanitarian crisis in some places. There is no water, little water, depending on where you are in the Keys. There's no cell service. Obviously, there's no power anywhere. So that makes it very difficult. And when you drive along the ocean side, guys, you see scene after scene like this. The good news, they believe that a lot of people got out. We know that from being here now for 6 days, something like that, that a lot of people left. We met a lot of people that stayed here for Hurricane Andrew 25 years ago that didn't stay for this one. That's the positive. And those that did stay had enough time to really prepare and get up onto a second story. But I'll give you an example right here. I stood here on Friday, right? Lord, it was Friday. We were here. Friday, there was a houseboat right here, and it had a sign on the side that said, "Hold my beer, Irma, I'll be right back." That's the houseboat. I mean, all you see is I guess the floor could be the roof. I don't know. It's just a piece of plywood now. Across from me was, you can't see, is a restaurant the sheriff's department used to like to go on Fridays because it was a fish fry. It looks like the tsunami in Thailand. It's actually in, in fact, we'll go this way. You guys can see it. It's in the water. It's insane. And you're seeing scene like this after scene after scene, just devastation along the ocean side. The bay side looks a little better. It's mostly wind and tree damage, roofs ripped off, signs down, trees into houses, that kind of thing. So the bay side will be cleaned up a lot quicker, but the ocean side just got absolutely smashed, guys. As you can see by these photos. This is just one area. We drove down to mile marker 55, so maybe 30 miles or so south of us right now, and it looks like this all the way down. They're worried about down by Marathon is what they're worried about. They say Marathon really got hammered hard. Now, mind you, we were outside the eye wall. We were about 30 miles outside that eye wall, but we were on what's called the dirty side of the storm. And as you guys watched on the news, we just got smashed yesterday, and it continued for, it had to be about 24, 36 hours of straight heavy winds. You know, hurricane force winds for more than 24 hours.
A couple things. I remember that houseboat on Friday that you were standing next to, and you and I were talking about some of the video down in the Caribbean where boats were in trees. So I asked then, I said, well, why do they think that's going to work out differently? It didn't. And then you've got an apartment complex, an 8 to 10 unit complex in the Keys, I understand, that just collapsed under the weight of the winds and the flooding. And that is outside of Plantation Key, I believe. And then you've got no hospitals still open. Is that the case?
Yep. Yeah, they've been doing aerial survey. In fact, I hear a helicopter coming again. They started the aerial survey. The hospitals are closed. There are no ambulance services whatsoever. The sheriff's department's not responding to calls. They're just going out and, I mean, obviously, if it's a serious emergency, they will. Right now, they're just assessing streets, where they can get in, where they cannot get in, to check on people's, if they're alive or not, who stayed, who didn't stay. National Guard is now at Isla Mirada to our south. They've staged there with massive backhoes. They've got like 50 of them, it seems like. Here comes the helicopter right now. I don't know what that is, but they're doing the assessment. It's too high up for you guys to see. Right here to my right, I want to show you one. People, though, did listen. That's the one thing we have to remember as compared to other hurricanes I've covered. People listened because there was somebody staying, one person and his wife, of all this area we showed on Friday. I know we talked about that, Harris, on Friday. Only one couple stayed. Everybody else got out, thank God. The couple that stayed in the middle of the hurricane went over to the house on the other side of that restaurant, which I showed you a moment ago, and they knocked on the door with life vests on, and they had to cut a hole and go into the second story because the surge here where I'm standing was about 6 feet of breadth. So I'm 6'2.5", 6'3". So think about that. The water was right here.
Oh my gosh!
And this area we were standing on was a nice jetty you could walk on. I mean, cement mixed with rock, and it's down like 2 feet. I mean, the water was that strong; it just ripped it out.
So let me get this straight: was that their house,
or insanely powerful storm?
Was that their house or somebody else's house that they cut a hole into to go try to get out of the way of this beast?
The people that somebody else's home, but those people stayed as well, and they did it together. They actually,
their
living room had 6 feet of water, and said they were talking about how they had waves in their living room.
Wow, and we know that emergency services had said, look, we're going to keep our people inside. We're not coming to get you if you decide to stay. They had to help themselves, just as you said would happen.
They actually had to evacuate.
So real quickly, I know you were in a bunker. You had described it to us late Saturday night. Did you have to get into that and stay in it for a while?
Well, our hotel, they had, yes and no. The hotel was a bunker in itself. Second story, they only had windows on one side. It was the good side if the wind was coming around. Those windows had built-in storm shutters that were metal that I actually latched down myself. The other side was just a metal door. It was a masonite block building, and we were on the second story. So, I mean, we were in the best possible place. They had another room in the middle of that building we could have gone into that was all surrounded by masonite block and no windows, but we didn't have to go that far. But it was pretty brutal. I mean, and you mentioned, I know you guys have to go, but the emergency services, they were stationed down in Marathon. They actually had to pull out and evacuate during the hurricane back to Isla Mirada, and I know they lost a number of cruisers. A number of police cars were gone.
Wow. We have to go because you, my friend, are on battery power, and we have been warned that you have to regenerate whenever you can. So we're going to let you walk away in that heavy wind that we can still hear.
Power for 52 hours.
Wow. Yeah, and that's why they said to people, if you stay, you better be ready. It's a good thing that they were able to break in and cut a hole into their neighbor's house, those two people who decided to stay alive. Adam Housley, thank you very much. Okay, so now we have some fresh pictures. Remember, Peter Ducey was down in Jacksonville, Florida, where this beast is moving in right now and causing epic flooding. Look at that. Wow. This is like early Houston type footage now. This looks a little bit like Harvey for Jacksonville, and it's not high tide yet for another hour and 45 minutes. Boy, they are bracing for that. Tropical storm Irma is what she is right now, but she's still mean as ever. Headed inland, more than 400 miles, as I mentioned, from where she first hit the U.S. mainland where Adam was down in the Keys, going northwest toward Georgia. That state is already feeling it. Atlanta, under its first ever tropical storm warning. I was born there. Never heard of that. Tens of thousands of people in the coastal and southern parts of the state are without utilities. Along with Georgia, Alabama, and South Carolina are at risk from storm surges. We've seen what this water can do. 40,000 people evacuating South Carolina's Barrier Islands as we speak. Let's go to Chief Meteorologist Rick Reichfield. Rick?
Harris, so the winds out of this storm are incredible. Naples, the highest measured at 142 miles an hour. Keep in mind, these are just where we have sensors to measure wind. And down on the Keys, where we've got these measurements in the 120, there are not a lot of spots to measure that wind. A lot of them were blown out as well. But these were what we actually recorded, or what was actually recorded. And Miami, way far away from the center of this, a 99-mile-an-hour wind. So obviously it went all the way up the Florida Peninsula. Now here it is across parts of Georgia, continuing to rotate. This yellow is incredibly heavy rain, and that is getting ready to rotate in towards the Atlanta. The southeast suburbs will feel it first. But that general flow continues to pull off towards from the east, and you can see the rainfall totals here now getting very extreme across parts of southeast Georgia, and we have more rain to go. We're going to see some areas another 3 to 5 inches of rain by the time this is done. A lot of places 3 to 5 inches of rain. And the problem is in addition to that rain, we have this onshore flow. So on the east side of Florida, not where the storm hit, and throughout Georgia and in towards South Carolina, the flow has been consistent, pulling all of the water onto land at the same time that it's raining, and that water that is kind of filling up in the streams and the creeks is trying to exit the shore. It can't, because this water is piling in, and that's causing incredible storm surge. Those pictures you're seeing in Jacksonville, coinciding when it does with high tide, it's going to be very dangerous. Go up towards Savannah. We're going to see measurements here that are higher than we saw yesterday or last year in Hurricane Matthew, and in some cases the highest we've ever seen for any kinds of measurements here for water rise. Same up towards Charleston. Get ready for continued storm surge. This wind that's here, it's going to increase throughout the day today, so we expect to see the storm surge peak later on today. We'll probably go through a couple of high tide cycles, more rain falling, trying to drain out into the ocean, and it can't because that ocean level is higher than the river that's trying to drain into it, and that's making all of the water rise, Harris.
Whew. I mean, it is a story about water. Once again, Rick Reichmuth, we'll come back to you as the news warrants. Thank you very much. So we are beginning to get a glimpse now of all of the damage that Irma has done to Florida. Millions of people still not out of the woods, as we've been telling you now, as this thing bears down on Jacksonville. So the danger remains, including storm surges that Rick was just talking about at record levels in some parts of the state. We're live with the very latest all over Irma. Stay close.
This is a Fox News alert. Millions of people are without power in Florida as what remains of Irma continues to lash the Sunshine State, even as the massive storm moves into Georgia. Storm surge warnings remain in effect for the Tampa Bay, St. Petersburg area, home to 2.5 million people. Residents in low-lying areas told to remain sheltered in place until authorities can assess the damage, and they say it's safe to come out, especially near beaches where Irma's winds were so strong they sucked the water out of Tampa Bay, leaving an eerie mix of sludge and puddles. But Irma's powerful tropical winds now pushing all that water back. And Matt Finn joins us live from the town of St. Pete Beach, which sits on a barrier island west of St. Petersburg. Matt, what are you seeing?
Well, Kennedy, we were hunkered down on St. Pete Beach last night. We thought we'd be the first to lose power. We're right up against the water, but we had power all through the night and into this morning. But coincidentally, Tampa Bay, some 300,000 people without power this morning. So it just goes to show that this storm had a mind of its own. I want to show you some of the unfortunate damage from Irma. This dinner cruise yacht crashed up against this boat here. It is the Starlight Sapphire dining yacht. The owner tells me, as you can see, it's up against that bridge there. County officials say the bridge did not suffer damage, but they are still working to determine if those wires and piping hanging there is hot. Then after that, the owner says they're going to send down a diver to check out the running gear underneath this boat. And to my right here, unfortunately, you could see where it crashed up against the land here. And it's still kind of dragging against it. A big picture here. Fortunately, this area was spared the wrath of Irma. Our friends down in Naples, that area took the brunt of the storm. This area, they expected a 6 to 8 foot storm surge. And as you can see, the water is choppy, but there was no storm surge here. We're able to drive around, not a lot of flooding. So fortunately, this area can breathe a sigh of relief. Even with the afternoon high tide, we don't expect any more major storm surges. So we will keep you updated on the recovery efforts here, getting power restored. And Kennedy, real quick, I just want to take this moment to thank the Fox News crew that I've been working with. A lot of us were in Texas and Harvey. Now we're over here in Florida for Irma. Producer Madeline Firsty, photographer Kathy Cochran, and field tech Kyle Rothenberg. You guys know well that the show does not go on without all of our teams and everyone in production. They've been out here dealing with the elements, dealing with equipment failing. So I just want to thank them because the report does not get on air without them, Kennedy.
No, absolutely right, Matt. And you guys really throw yourselves into the heart of the storm, no matter where it is. I thought about all of you today as we were getting ready for the show. And, you know, this is your second storm in as many weeks. And you were just getting pummeled. You are without sleep in order to bring us those images so people in the region know exactly what they're dealing with, how dangerous it is. And so the rest of us can see the after effects and keep people in these storms, Harvey and Irma, in our hearts and thoughts and prayers so we don't forget about the wrath. Matt, thank you so much.
For sure, Kennedy. You got it.
All right, I'm going to take it out to the couch right now. Many of you have personal history and experience in Florida. Abby, you have lived there. Have you talked to some of your family members there? And have you ever experienced anything like this?
No, I don't think the state has. I've spent time living in Orlando. That's where my mom is from. But a lot of my family is in where Matt Finn was, right around there near St. Pete and Clearwater. I called them this morning because the tough part about the storm is when it hit that area, it was overnight. So it was completely dark. So they woke up this morning unsure of what the situation would be. I called my father-in-law and my grandma, who's on oxygen. She wasn't able to evacuate like so many people in Florida. And they said, look, we looked up and at least the roof was still there. So I think that area for some was better than it could have been. They left there, they went more inland, their beach house. They have no idea what that looks like because they're not able to get out there. So that's going to be in the coming days. And that's what's so hard for so many people in Florida is going back and seeing what is left of everything that they have.
But here's a good thing, though. Unlike Atlanta, which is getting hit right now, they are experienced with hurricanes, and they've adjusted their houses since Andrew, so they all have storm shutters, they have storm windows if they can afford it, and if they can't, they got out. Like, if you even look at the Jacksonville shot, there's no cars in the streets.
Yeah.
Where in Texas, you saw in Houston them there because they were told, hey, hang out, don't leave, stay in your home.
And we're talking about different elements of the storm because obviously it hits different places in different ways. You see rain from Harvey, you see wind and storm surge from
That's a very good point. And the sheer magnitude of the storm, the power of it, obviously, but also just the size. I mean, you knew that every part of Florida was going to be touched because the storm was bigger than the state of Florida. You mentioned Atlanta. This is just crossing the Associated Press wires. The Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority, MARTA, has just suspended all bus, rail, and mobility service for today, at least, ahead of the anticipated severe weather conditions moving in now by Irma. Due to those, Governor Nathan Deal now has expanded the emergency declaration throughout the entire state of Georgia. So you're now starting to see them react to much like the west coast of Florida had to. But you have a good point. The west coast of Florida has also seen more hurricanes than most of Georgia has.
Right. 60-mile-an-hour winds.
Plus much
and
higher
even though it's
than
a tropical storm, they're getting hit in Atlanta. And I was in Atlanta during the Super Bowl when they got hit with snow, and they're just not used to it, just like Dallas wasn't, and they just had no idea how to handle it. I'm hoping they adjust to this better.
Yeah, they've never had a tropical storm warning in Georgia. I know you have so much family there too, Melissa. You said they're out of power.
Same spot. I mean, the issue now becomes the idea of the cleanup and the restoration without power. You have almost 6 million people in Florida right now who don't have power. They woke up this morning, as you said, it hit overnight. We were on the air overnight as the Tampa area was getting hit, and our family who's there woke up this morning and said, it looks very much like a war zone. You just walk outside and there's stuff everywhere, and you don't have the power there to get things back up and running. So it's going to be a major cleanup effort. But luckily these folks in Jacksonville, to be under so much water like that and the way it's sitting with high tide coming in, they haven't seen a surge like that since 1965, and the damage is just unimaginable.
If you're on the beach, I hope you have flood insurance, and they probably in Jacksonville more than likely do because this isn't new to them.
Well, the percentages of people who were living without it are pretty daunting. I do want to mention, though, because as you talk about electrical power, that's one thing, but I'm reading all of the notices now, county after county, no water pressure. This is a utility situation now. So now you're in your house, you don't have running water, you don't have a lot of the other things that might make it easier to keep you in your house. It's difficult. We've got to wait out those 52 to 72 hours now for either the water to recede, for people to be able to get to you. You don't want to go outside and get hurt. Because in many areas, their emergency services are not what they always are. In the Keys, no hospitals open.
Right.
Kenny?
All right, very good. Well, we are continuing to track Irma. And next, we're going to go to Orlando, home to a cluster of theme parks, including Disney World, as you know. The city saw wind gusts up to 100 miles an hour and torrential rain. And President Trump approving a disaster declaration for Florida, authorizing the use of federal funds to help in several counties there. He says he plans to go there very soon. The president's response so far and what he needs to do next. Stay with us.
Boy, I tell you, as we inch toward the 2 p.m. Eastern hour, we are watching for that high tide in Jacksonville, and look at the winds whipping up that water with white caps. This is downtown Jacksonville. Boy, it looks like they superimposed some buildings behind the ocean. Irma has been downgraded, even though it doesn't look like it there. It's now a tropical storm, but the winds and the water, well, obviously still doing their worst. Jacksonville getting record-breaking storm surge, and it's only expected to get worse with that high tide at 2 p.m. Eastern expected. People trapped inside their homes are being told to put out a white flag or something like that, so that rescuers will know how to find them. Much of Central Florida, including Orlando, with all of its theme parks, is suffering significant damage. The National Guard and local fire rescue teams are evacuating more than 120 flooded homes already just outside the city, and they are doing more. Bill Himmer is live in Orlando now. Bill?
Hey, Harris, good afternoon again. You know, we're still getting these squalls roll in through here, and it's going to continue for several hours here. I'd say maximum winds, maybe 35 miles an hour, maybe 40 on the high end, but mostly in the 25 to 30 mile an hour range. And they come in periods here, and then they leave, and then they come back again. And that swirling is going to continue until perhaps 6 o'clock into the early evening hours. With regard to Jacksonville, one fine distinction I think we need to make. We saw the water in Houston, and the water was a result of a hurricane, Harvey, that stalled over the city and just dumped rain, 52 inches of rain. And the water in that low-lying area had nowhere to go. The ground was just saturated. All it could do was just keep it in place, and that's where you saw road after road and neighborhood after neighborhood underwater. The Jacksonville deal is a bit different. It's tidal influence with a high tide 90 minutes away. I know it's no consolation for the business owners watching this right now and listening to Peter Ducey talk about the lack of sandbags there. But this water is going to rise. It's going to come up for some time, and then it's going to go out with the ocean as well as we move into the evening hours tonight, and we'll see what is left of there. Very similar to what we saw in Miami yesterday, Harris, and again last evening. I think the pictures out of the Keys from Adam Housley are stunning. If you listen to Adam's reporting, when he and producer Andrew Sloan wrote out that Category 4 impact, they're just in one spot of a 70 to 80 mile stretch of roadway. And so now, I mean, the imagination runs wild just to think, Harris, how much damage there is in the Florida Keys at the moment that we have yet to see.
Yeah, you know, Bill, and we're starting to get just notes. I mean, not even all the pictures, but just notes through tweets and other social media about all the damage in the Keys. I mean, people just putting out one-liners about apartment complex that's fallen, about the fact that the bridges have to individually be checked. They don't want anybody out, even when the sun comes out. They don't want anybody on any structures because they took so much wind, and a hairline crack might not be something that you and I could see with our bare eyes, and something could fall, and they don't want people out there. I mean, there's just so much more to the story in the Keys. Several hundred miles away from where you're standing right now was where Irma first made landfall.
Yeah, and there's another part of the state, too, that we're going to give a lot of attention to once we can access that, and that's Marco Island. Marco Island was the scene of the second hit when it was reduced to a Cat 3, but still, when you think about the force of that ocean hitting land yesterday, and no access to the road there. By the way, there's a curfew in Orlando till 6 o'clock tonight. You would not know it from the traffic behind me. We heard a police car just go by a moment ago with a loudspeaker. I'm not quite sure what they were saying, but we believe the curfew is in effect till 6 o'clock till tonight. Having said all of this, Harris, we should be grateful based on, you know, a lot of the projections, frankly, that were bound for the state of Florida. When you think about the timing of the tide going out, with a storm hitting land in Sarasota and St. Pete's and further south in Fort Myers and into Naples, I mean, it could have been a stroke of luck or even a minor miracle that the timing happened when it did, and that may...
I'd say bigger than a minor miracle.
As we move forward.
But Bill, what can you say about Orlando? I mean, I see the wind.
Right.
You know, when we saw some wide shots, the wind looks a lot worse than it does when it's close up. So for the people in Central Florida wondering about their relatives or what's going on, are the roads pretty much passable? Are the people able to get around, curfew or not?
This is Monday. Since Friday night, Brian, this is the most traffic I've seen in Orlando going back 4 days right now. They heeded the warnings. They got off the roads. They went to hotels. They went for higher ground. They went to relatives. They went to friends' houses. They moved around the state as the storm forced them to move. And they're going to make their way home. But, you know, the important thing now, electric lines in the road, accessibility, they're urging people to stay where they are for the moment. I will tell you, Brian, though, patience only lasts so long. And the location we've been at here in Orlando, I mean, it's a remarkable thing, Brian, to hear the kindness and the patience on behalf of so many people. But it's going to run out. But I think, fortunately for the people here in Orlando, 300,000 lost power. They got lucky.
Bill, we're watching a lot of traffic go by behind you. We've seen a couple utility trucks go by, which is great news because, of course, everybody without power is very frustrated and wants their power back. But we've seen a lot of cars go back and forth behind you, and yours is the only live shot where we're seeing that. We're going through all the reporters. So it does seem like there are people moving around where you are. How long has that been going on?
I'd say a couple hours. I mean, honestly, this is the first time. The first time we've seen it. I think what it does, it gives people a sense of confidence that the worst is over and they've gotten through this, at least here locally. Other parts of the states, that's going to be a big matter. I mean, what you're looking at in Jacksonville, I mean, this is something else. 52 years since you've seen water this high. We've yet to see the images out of Savannah. And watching Rick Reitnew's report from 10 minutes ago, Charleston's next after that, and the tide is timed perfectly to bring more water into these low-lying areas.
Well, Charleston's been hit so many times before. I mean, you've got so much tender ground along the coastline there. A couple things: 125 plus rescues reported of people stranded by flooding where you are in Orlando, Bill. And you talked about the Keys. The National Guard is saying that it's now trying to land at Opa-locka Airport so that they can get to people in the Keys and help them out. One quick last thought from you.
We talked to Bill Nelson, the senator from Florida, an hour ago. He's going with Marco Rubio on a Coast Guard helicopter right now. They hope to get to Key West, Florida. They're going to come back with their story later tonight. We hope they have their pictures and images. We have yet to see the aerials. And my best guess, Harris, is once we see the aerials, that strip of the Florida Keys could be just a scene of devastation as we move mile after mile after mile. So we await to see whether or not that is indeed the case.
The police chief in the Keys told us on Friday that that's what he was anticipating, but they were ready for it. We pray for them. We'll get those images later today on Fox News. Thank you, Bill Hemmer, very much.
We do. Right, and that's why in the Caribbean they don't have great infrastructure. 28 people died before we even got to Florida.
They added another 10 now, so I mean, it's
38.
And not to mention the fact that the National Guard and the Coast Guard, the U.S. Coast Guard, Admiral Pete Brown told me over the weekend that they had moved all their assets out of the way. They had already moved more than 1,000 people off of just St. Martin, Americans, to get them, because, they're running out of supplies there. So they were going in ahead of the storm in between that and Jose to try to get our people off those islands.
That is amazing. Jose hit a lot of the areas that were hit by Hurricane Irma. Just
U.S. Coast Guard, say those words a few times with some gratitude today, because those people were working really hard this weekend. All right, we'll move on. Situation critical in one of Florida's most populous cities, Miami. This is historic. Floodwaters now are still rising. Dozens of rescues underway as authorities tell people to get to higher ground as the tide comes in. The latest straight ahead. Stay close.
The storm's immediate impact just hours after the powerful winds battered that city. The storm so big that even as it tracked up Florida's west coast, its storm surge flooded Miami streets on the other side of that state. Meantime, Miami police now investigating reports of looting as Irma battered that city. Authorities say a group in a white truck hit multiple stores. At least 2 people arrested. 2 others have been detained. Phil Keating is live on the ground in Miami with the very latest. We know in these situations, Phil, it brings out the very best in people, but can also bring out the very worst. What are you hearing?
Absolutely. I mean, usually it takes a few more days after a hurricane blows through for the looting to really start, but the storm was still happening yesterday, and there were at least 3 reports of looting. One of them, Broward, 7 young men trying to steal a bunch of shoes from a loose shoe store, and there was a report last night about a guy trying to steal some guns from a sporting store. This is busy Normandy Boulevard. It is very busy all the time. It's always traffic. This tells you today's not a normal day. Far from normal. Most people haven't gone back to work. Most people are basically cleaning up, and there is so much debris to clean up. This is a 2.5-foot diameter tree, very, very heavy. You can see the root system. It all blew down as the winds shifted from the east going west to the south going north. It was a very rough, hellacious day. We stood in it for most of the day yesterday. It was driving winds, driving rains, and it was just a pummeling that never seemed to stop. 30 hours that the South Florida East Coast endured of Hurricane Irma. Basically, no one was on the streets. The people who didn't evacuate were hiding in their homes and hotel rooms. But not every Irma victim can clean up just yet today. plenty of neighborhoods still dealing with the effects of the 2 to 4 foot storm surge, which in most cases has receded, but by far not all. If you're elderly or disabled, well, as we found out today, the day or days after a hurricane can be frustratingly overwhelming.
First, we're going to call our insurance companies for the two autos. I'm not sure if the cars will even start because their engines may be half underwater. And our flood insurance and homeowners insurance carriers. And so we'll notify all the insurance companies. That's our main chore today.
Now, we hardly have battery on the phone.
And you are looking live at returning residents who have walked about a mile or two over the bridge, which connects the mainland, it connects North Bay Village, before you get to the mainland, with Miami Beach. These are people who evacuated, they left the car on the other side of the bridge, and now they're coming home where they can check out and see what the damage is. The reason they're walking and the reason there's a roadblock on the bridge is because nobody is allowed to enter Miami Beach, the city of, now until tomorrow morning. It is closed off to anybody getting in. They want to make sure they get there, make sure all the trees are not blocking roadways anymore, make sure all the fuel and gasoline spills and oil hazards are cleaned up. Also, make sure there's no power lines blocking the road, as has been the case many, many times. Speaking of power, still a major issue. It's always a top priority right after a hurricane. About 1.5 million households and businesses in Broward and Miami-Dade County currently without power. So you take 2 people living in each place, that's, 3 million people in South Florida still without power. But Florida Power and Light has 17,000 crews all out and about, 17,000 people, and they are working fast. We've seen it ourselves this morning. They go in, they take care of what they do, get the power restored, move on to the next project. Same with the trees. This whole road was blocked because the storm surge was all over the road. Abby.
All right, Phil. Yeah, this is the emotional part. Everyone walking around, seeing what was left of many of their homes. Phil, thank you so much. Live there on the ground in Miami. I want to bring it out to the couch now. We're talking about, the emotions of this and what people go home to, but also the power, right? I mean, Harris, you were just telling us the commercial break is now reported that 65% of the state of Florida now without power.
6.5 million people, and it's not just the electrical power, as Melissa and I were talking about. It's the life inside your house without utilities. Wow, that's Orlando. Everybody, look at your screen. You want to know about the power of a storm? Remember how Bill Hemmer said that they were lucky? Wow, what does it take to move something that's been in the earth for that long onto the ground?
Yeah, just
That's
shear
amazing.
it in half.
Hey guys, I want to get this in because this is coming from Charleston County, South Carolina, from their Twitter, from the emergency management Twitter. Charleston's under a tornado warning right now. They have suspended all EMS operations because of high winds. They are under a high wind bridge advisory condition red now. And so you've got that tornado warning in effect in Charleston as this beast of a storm, Irma now, a tropical storm, moves on northwest.
Yeah, it's so important to take those warnings seriously. And we're seeing now the aftermath of what happened in Florida, what's still going on in Florida, and what happens with these amounts of winds. I mean, you have shattered windows, you've got construction cranes falling down, the size of those trees. I mean, there's a reason why they're saying, get out of these places.
I have no clue why someone would say, I have an idea, let's leave the crane up. I mean, you're about to get hit by a hurricane.
I was thinking about that on Saturday as I was watching some of those.
I don't think it's that easy.
I
don't think it's that easy. I don't think it's that easy to get the crane down. You know what?
Okay, but
you are the money person on the couch. I think some of the decisions are also made because of dollars. And I only say that because I heard people talking about how they didn't want to take them down.
I guess, a lot of those cranes are assembled in place, they're carried up to the top of a building and then they're assembled up there. It is very hard. It is very expensive to move them out of the way. Of course, you can't balance that against the loss of life, which is what really matters. I think one of the things that's most astounding about this, though, is you never know exactly where the storm is going to go. So everybody sort of bets ahead of time. I'm going to be okay. It's not going to be in our area. And we are always surprised afterwards by where it got hit.
The people from Miami went to Naples. I had the mayor tell me that on the phone today.
And then they were forced to evacuate. All right, well, this is clearly not over yet, as you're saying, Harris. It is moving upward. It's still a very, very strong storm. So Tropical Storm Irma pushing northward, as we've been talking about, over Georgia now after devastating the state of Florida. Why the threat is still far from over. The latest details on that right after the break. Stick with us.
After relentlessly battering Florida, the massive storm is causing record flooding in Jacksonville, the high tide in about an hour and 6 minutes. We've been telling you that. It's left millions of people across the state, 65% of the state of Florida now, without electrical power. Georgia bracing for more impact. Jonathan Seri is in southern Georgia. Jonathan?
Hi, Harris. Right now, we're experiencing some heavy rains. There's a bit of a lull in the wind, but occasionally we get some gusts. Nothing approaching hurricane or even tropical storm force, but enough to down some of the tall pine trees here that's causing some power. Right downtown Tifton, Georgia, you can see the storefronts are all dark. Power's been knocked out to this part of Tifton. This morning we woke up to no power in our hotel, went out at 5 a.m., but then came back a few hours later, so it's very spotty. But this storm is affecting the entire state. Governor Nathan Deal declaring a state of emergency in all 159 Georgia counties. On the coast, the issue is storm surge. They had to temporarily close down the Highway 80 causeway linking Tybee Island with the mainland. And then in Atlanta, they're worried about downed trees from the heavy winds and also crosswinds in the airport. In fact, Atlanta-based Delta Airlines canceling approximately 900 flights today, and MARTA, the Rapid Transit Authority in the Atlanta area, canceling all bus and rail service today. So this state is taking Irma very seriously, Harris.
Absolutely, and just north of you, of course, they're getting ready for tornado warnings as this thing moves in. Stay safe, Jonathan. Thank you. We'll be right back. Stay with us. As we wrap and go here, Governor Rick Scott is joining the U.S. Coast Guard for an aerial tour of Tropical Storm Irma's impacts on the Florida Keys today. We'll be reporting that and bringing you fresh pictures as that happens. Brian Kilmeade, always a pleasure to have you.
Thanks so much for having me. It's always great to come on.
And I know that you are on the air 99 hours a day, so we appreciate
But
you.
there's no show like this. I love being here.
God bless you. All right, as we wrap it up here, I'm Harris Faulkner. We're going to go straight away to Shepard Smith.
It's 10 a.m. in the West Coast, 1 p.m. in Florida, where we're still tracking the remnants of Hurricane Irma, now a tropical storm, but still causing plenty of trouble. And for folks in and around Jacksonville, this afternoon could bring plenty of rain.
It's bad now. It's going to continue to get worse.
And a major flooding threat in a metropolitan area that's home to more than 1 million people. Across central Florida and South Florida, we're getting an idea of the damage Irma left behind. More than 60% of the state has no power. Many who evacuated still have no idea what happened to their homes. We're tracking the destruction. And we're still waiting to hear just how bad it is in certain parts of the Florida Keys. The Governor Rick Scott headed there to assess the damage after a warning of a humanitarian disaster from local officials on the ground. Let's get to it.
Now, Shepard Smith reporting live from the Fox News deck.
And first from the Fox News deck this Monday afternoon, a weakened but still powerful Irma is moving into Georgia after leaving destruction in parts of Florida and the Keys. More than 7 million homes and businesses now have no power in multiple states. As forecasters warn, conditions in areas all across Florida will remain dangerous and life-threatening. The flooding in Jacksonville has already reached record levels, and the water is still rising. Sheriff's officials say if you're living in a high-risk area, get out now. If that's not an option, they say, people need to find a house with a second story. The National Weather Service reports floodwaters could rise to epic levels as much as 6 feet above a normally dry land. Jacksonville's mayor said today the flooding today is unlike anything he's seen before.
If you need to get out, please put what represents a white flag, anything white, somewhere on your house that can be viewed visibly from outside. We have search and rescue teams ready to deploy.
More in a moment on Jacksonville. We just got this drone video showing the extent of the damage and flooding in Naples. This isn't far from where the storm made its second landfall yesterday afternoon. All across the Florida Peninsula, utility officials say some people could be in the dark for weeks. The storm made its first landfall in Cudjoe Key yesterday as a Category 4 hurricane, leveling homes and businesses there. Wind gusts reached 130 miles an hour. A local official says the destruction in the Keys and some parts of it is a looming humanitarian crisis, and that's a quote. He said, quote, disaster mortuary teams are headed to the Keys, apparently to help with identifying victims. One person who rode out the storm in Summerland Key said it sounded like a war, as if explosives were going off. Local officials in the Key say there is no fuel, no electricity, no running water, no cell service. They say supplies are running low for many people. Another person who stayed behind in Key Largo said the waves were coming right into his home.
We were on a house down the road, a hurricane-proof house. But it was very windy and the waves were coming in the living room up the downstairs. We're sad, but we'll make it.
The good spirit, Irma downgraded to a tropical storm over Florida, but forecasters say it's still packing winds near hurricane force as it moves up and into the state of Georgia. The National Hurricane Center reports that tornadoes are possible today near Georgia and South Carolina coasts. Hundreds of thousands of people under mandatory evacuation orders in Georgia, Alabama, and the Carolinas. Peter Ducey is live for us in Jacksonville. I want to get to him. Peter, well, what's this? Apparently it's still wet.
It's really wet, Shepard. This is Bay Street, 2 blocks in from the St. Johns River, and I was just checking out when you were coming to me. The water looks like it's about to go into this bar and grill, this marketing agency, this brokerage firm, because they don't have sandbags outside. Jacksonville was never really talked about as a place that was going to get the full force of Irma, yet here we are with about 90 minutes more, according to local officials, of rising water. You can see, again, on neither side are there sandbags, but there is a lot of water and there's some damage. This looks like it was either somebody's garage door or a storm shutter. It's just laying now wasted in the middle of the street. And the water has been rising not only since we got here, but since the power company got here. There are 3 trucks, and you can see where this gentleman parked, this utility truck parked. The water is already rising to the point where it's going to be tough for him to get back in. So you look further down here, and actually, Craig, could we take it off the sticks just for 1 second? Just to come down to look at this hotel. You can really get a sense of how much the water is still coming in when you look down at the Hyatt Regency, which I'm told by somebody who answered the phone is closed indefinitely. They may not be open until Friday, but you look through the St. Johns River is basically out of sight on the other side of that hotel. That is a riverfront hotel, but obviously the river is now on the wrong side of it. You can see, if you look to the right near the stop sign, some parking meters are almost completely submerged. And again, the water is still rising. The Jacksonville mayor said this morning that the water could still be rising 4 to 6 more feet. If that happened, it would be up to about here. And they're saying around 2 o'clock is going to be the highest water level around here. They wanted everybody out before, but you heard him telling people if you didn't get out in time to hang a white sheet, and they'll try to get you. A lot of people have already been calling for help. The last update, 600 calls so far. They don't have much of a breakdown in terms of how many of them were calling for rescues, but about 60 calls an hour since the water started rising. And again, it's still coming up, Shep.
Peter Ducey in Jacksonville, back to him as events warrant. This is the Julia Tuttle Causeway down in South Florida. Look at this. I think this is the eastbound lanes of the Julia Tuttle Causeway. So on Interstate 195, heading onto Miami Beach, Mount Sinai Hospital is right there. And I guess cars were stuck on this thing. So they've got people who are eastbound and people who are westbound all in what appears to be the eastbound lanes. These pictures from WSVN's Chopper, our South Florida news station, and our local affiliate there in South Florida. The recovery in South Florida has been more difficult than maybe some people thought once the storm was passing just this time yesterday. I guess it hadn't passed by now, but it was certainly on the way. And some difficulty there with traffic and with flooding in local areas. We've been watching this throughout the early afternoon as the helicopters have been finally back up after the wind passed. In Collier County, Florida, our local station, Fox there, has been interviewing people on the roadways as well, and where they have some damage, that's the Naples, Immokalee, Estero area, and where I think the biggest effects of the storm right now are where our own Peter Ducey is up in Jacksonville. You said this could get up 4 to 6 feet. I see the wind still howling there, Peter.
The wind is howling, and Shep, the mayor, when he described this, he said this is a Category 3 surge. The storm didn't hit as a Category 3 here, but you look, the water, Shep, it looks like you're standing on the banks of a bay or of a river or of the ocean. It is coming in with so much force, and again, the level is still rising. We've been here about 90 minutes so far, and the water has moved a couple of feet. We haven't really seen a dramatic rise in terms of how deep it is here, but again, this is just one spot. There's a lot of places for the water to go. That is not the case. That is not what they're expecting in every residential area. There are a lot of residential neighborhoods that they want people out of. Businesses don't seem to be that much of a problem because we have been driving all around and it doesn't really seem like there is anybody that's open. And the only people that are really out are a handful of police officers and some curious folks who came out as soon as the rain stopped. But we don't really see anything open, so business is not the big concern in terms of getting people out to safety so that they don't need to be rescued. That is residents. And while the safety of business owners or customers may not be much of a concern right now, and you can see the wind really just whipping this water up, and as we know, it's not just water. There's a lot of stuff on the street that's now in this too. But there's going to be some serious damage because I was peeking a little bit earlier. The water isn't into these places just yet. But you would have to think that it's only a matter of time until it starts seeping in because, again, no real protective measures taken because Jacksonville was not ever mentioned as one of the places that was going to get a lot of damage. And this is actually the first emergency responder that we have seen come through here. I have no idea where he may be going. It doesn't look like there's a ton of urgency right now. As a truck leaves, this pickup truck, we saw these gentlemen pulling a stranded car out just a few minutes ago. Somebody who went in where the water was too high. It looks like the water may be too high for the Jacksonville Fire Department as well right now.
Peter Ducey in Jacksonville, where they just reported
the lights back off.
They just recorded a 52-mile-an-hour wind gust there at Jacksonville Beach. Let's get to the mayor of Jacksonville Beach, Charlie Latham, who's lived there for 50 years and says he's never seen anything like this. Mr. Mayor, how are things this afternoon?
Well, we're hanging in there, Shep. We're not as bad as South Florida, but we've certainly got our work cut out for us.
What is the immediate concern?
Well, right now we have as Mayor Curry said in Jacksonville, we've got a historical flood in the area. In all my years of Jacksonville Beach living, I've never seen anything like this before. We had 27 inches of rain in 24 hours, and so pretty much
27 inches of rain. That was not the prediction for anyone.
No, sir, it wasn't. And that if you look at any reservoir, if you look at any lake or retention pond, they just all have flooded into the street. So we've got massive flooding in our residential and business communities.
Jacksonville.
Are people ready for this?
Well, we were as ready as we could be. And I'm proud to say that we were able to keep our sewage and water online during the storm, which means there's no boiling requirements and that they can have immediate use of those facilities. But our electric our customers are down about 90%. So we've got a significant amount of work to get done. And we have last year at Matthew, Matthew, we had a significant breach of our dunes and had to pay $7.5 million to rebuild them and only finished a couple of months ago. And I'm happy to say it looks like they held up pretty well.
What are you telling residents of Jack's Beach this afternoon?
Right now, we're telling them to stay inside while we continue to do our damage assessments. We've got our own utility company here in Jacksonville Beach, so we want to make sure that there's no electrical issues or concerns. We want to do our very best to clean up the roadways so that there's no potential traffic issues or stranding issues with deep water. And then as soon as we can get that done, we'll coordinate with the city of Jacksonville and open the bridges to bring folks back home.
The Jacksonville Beach mayor there with us, Charlie Latham, who's lived there 50 years and never seen the likes of this. Mr. Mayor, it's good of you. Thank you. I want to go back to Miami now. See these signs? Alton Road, MacArthur Parkway, and they've got this blocked off. It turns out this is people trying to return to Miami Beach. And they'll only let you in if you have a driver's license that says, I live on Miami Beach. Otherwise, they turn you around. And that was the reason for what they would have called yesterday contraflow. Allowing people to come in is just not something they can do. Remember, they had shut down Miami Beach until noon today. At very least, they weren't going to let any residents get back in there. And afternoon, which is now, 1:15. So people are trying to get back into Miami Beach, but everybody can't get in there. You have to live there to get back in there. They're very worried about keeping law and order, something that they feel like is very important. But some live pictures now we're getting from Hard Rock Stadium. This is the former Joe Robbie Stadium. That it isn't called that anymore is a matter of deep wounds for me, so we won't get into that. but Hard Rock Stadium, they now call it, where the Dolphins play, some serious damage up there to the roof. They're working to assess how bad that damage was and what they're going to do about returning to football in the western part of the county there where the Dolphins play. So there's a lot to watch this afternoon. Down in South Florida, it's damage assessment in the Florida and trying to get the power back on. Down in the Florida Keys, they're working to make sure all their bridges are structurally sound, that eventually get their electricity back up and running, and to find out if there's anybody they haven't been able to find who actually needs help. In Southwest Florida, they're trying to get everything back up and going, and now this is from one of the local airports in the Miami area. This is Opelika Airport, where WFOR's chopper, our network news service affiliate there, is flying, and you can see a bunch of planes overturned there on the tarmac. And so, as I mentioned, the choppers have only been up for a short period of time. You can only put them up when the winds are, when the winds are safe. So we're starting to see all the damage across the region, and we have like 4 or 5 choppers that are flying to which we have access, and we'll take you to those throughout this news hour. I'm Shepard Smith in New York with continuing coverage of the devastation of Irma, and it continues right after this.
Well, there's most of the damage you've seen done and what it has occurred, but there's more to go because we still got Alabama and Georgia and all them getting battered up. So I hope this covered most of your areas of people that you knew that were there or evacuated or something, and I hope they all came out okay and safe. We've had a lot of devastation the last few months, so we better start counting our blessings every day, because you never know when your days come. So that's all I got to say. Talk at you later. Bye.